Hey guys, today I am talking with two of my friends who are launching churches here in Atlanta. And what we wanted to do was to have a conversation about the process of us launching our church. To one, if you're thinking about launching church, to get some insight from it. And two, if you think about attending one of our churches, you can see the process that we're going through. So let me introduce everybody's here. We got, and interesting here, we all three went to the same church, Faith Christian Center, back in the 90s and early 2000s. So we're launching from a similar theological perspective. We all went to different types of ministry schools, but we're coming from the same basic word of faith belief system. So George Houston, he's launching a church in Atlanta in an Acworth area. And his church is going to be called Linked Up North.
Woodstock area. Woodstock.
Sorry. Woodstock. We got Evan Black. He's launching Propel Church. He's in Acworth. And his church is called Propel Church. And so, guys, the first question I want to ask you guys is, what fears did you have to overcome in this process of launching the church or church planning? Like, what was kind of like when you was thinking about this, what was the fears that was kind of going through your guys' mind? Yeah, feel free to jump in. Anybody wants to break the ice on that one?
Go ahead, George. You got that.
All right. I'd say first of all, thank you for this opportunity, Amos, to get together with you and Evan, and we'll talk. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about the importance of being in relationship with other church planners. I think that's so important for us. I would say for me, the first fear, like anything else that you do with God. Mm-hmm. When you're attempting to follow God's plan for your life, I think there's always this healthy fear of, am I doing the right thing? Did I hear mm-hmm. God's voice clearly? And for me, once I settled that, I think for the most part, that was the biggest one to get over. And for me, it took a little bit more prayer time just to make sure I heard from God correctly. And this is mm-hmm. For me, this was not a 1 year ago decision. I mapped this decision all the way back to 2005 when I first heard the call of God to ministry. So mm-hmm. to me, it goes back that far. It's not just a 2020, 2021 decision.
Interesting. For me, it's like, this represents probably my second attempt at this, because like I started the Church Entrepreneurs in 2014 as an online ministry. And then maybe like 2 years ago, I started sensing I should do some local stuff in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I think I was afraid to actually launch it. Right. So I kind of half did it. You know what I'm saying? So like I picked we'll meet we'll meet every 2 weeks on Thursday. Right. You know what I'm saying? So I was kind of like tiptoeing around it and not actually doing, I think, what God wanted to do. So that effort didn't work. And so when it came back this year, I was like, okay, God, we already tried this one time. It didn't really work. And I felt like he was telling me, well, you didn't really do it like 2 years ago, like you're supposed to do. So this effort kind of represents like the first time I think I'm all in on it. So I'm not tiptoeing around and saying I'm all in on this particular one. And I think my fear was, really a couple of fears. One, will anybody come? Two, what's my pastor gonna say about this? Sure. So these are big deals, right? When you're launching churches. So those are some of my fears. How about you, Evan?
Yeah, I think mine's a little unique because I was pastoring for the last 9 years, mm-hmm. And I loved our church. I mean, I loved our church. I loved our city. I loved our community. You think about an example of when you're pastoring, how you want it to be. And mm-hmm. that's exactly where I was. We had a guy from our church come through the Atlanta area last week, and we were sitting down, we were talking, and he said, well, what's going to be different about Propel Church? And I said, you know what, man, at the end of us pastoring in Texas, that's pretty much how this is going to be when it's right, because it was mm-hmm. so good. So I say all that to say some of my fears were, God, you want us to do what? You want us to start over? Why? It's so good right now. Like, why mm-hmm. would we do that? At the time, me and my wife were both working at the church. So we're walking away from all of our income. I'm from the Georgia area. So yeah, it's kind of like coming home, but mm-hmm. I don't know a lot of Christians in this area, and the ones I do are in great churches.
Yeah, are in church already, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So so a lot of it didn't make sense. There's still some, are we going to have enough money, or is anybody going to mm-hmm. show up? Are we going to have enough volunteers? Because God knows I can't sing.
Yeah, me neither. So that's a big question I get. Like, what you gonna do about worship, Amos? I said, I don't know yet. I'm working on it.
That's definitely something we can talk about on camera or behind the scenes, because that's the worship scene in Atlanta is very interesting. I'll just leave it at that.
you got to be on point with worship in Atlanta. You can't just show up.
For sure.
Yeah. You know, and there's a ton of things, right? Like, where are you going to meet?
Mm-hmm.
How much is that going to cost? So it's one thing to raise money to get it off the ground. It's another thing to say, are we going to be able to meet a monthly budget? Where do we even know where to set that? We have no idea how many people are coming and all that kind of stuff. So, man, this question, we can
go on forever, right?
I could talk a long time on that.
Yeah.
No, and if I could jump in one thing, and the cool thing about us being in relationship with each other is we're launching 3 different ways. And so I'm fortunate to have, I'll call it ascending church. I'm very fortunate to have that. And so, but that also comes with its own sets of concerns. And, you know, our pastors have been great. So I don't have any issues there. But still, every situation you have, I think this is great for every Christian to hear. No matter what situation you have, the enemy is going to try to bring some fear about the situation.
Yeah.
So whereas my situation wasn't finding a location, because I had help with that. Praise God. But still, there's the enemy will always try to bring something that you can be in fear about. And that's the fun part about, as I said, being in a relationship, because we can talk about those concerns and give each other advice, and then say, I did it this way, or this worked for me, or this didn't work for me. And I think community is so important for us.
Yeah, that's good.
You know, one thing about that though, that has I've had to fight some fearful thoughts because of community. And I don't know if y'all recognize this, but any church planner you talk to, they talk about, man, this is going to be hard.
Oh,
everything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Good point.
And, you know, just be ready for a spiritual battle. Like, you start hearing all this stuff and I'm like, oh man, you know,
it's coming, right?
Right. Like, I don't even know what I might need to be afraid of. I don't even know, you know, like what could be coming. So I've had to fight that a little bit too. Like, man, this spiritual battle, these wars, whatever, I know I win. I know we come out on top, but that journey to get there, when you don't know what's coming.
But you don't know, right?
Yeah. That's been interesting.
I think a lot of people expect, like, because, you know, people, you know, really Atlanta and America is really church, right? And people have certain expectations of church. Right. I can imagine people showing up, let's say, hey, where is the kids ministry? Where is the singles ministry? Where is this ministry? Where is that team? Like, they got all these notions of these bigger churches, like, where's these things at? Right. And it's like, hey, we just getting started, you know. You know, so
that's good. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Let me ask you guys a second question, you know, as we're talking here. So what obstacles presented themselves that you didn't see coming? Like, you know, like what the great philosopher Mike Tyson always says, you know, everybody got a plan to get punched in the face, right?
What obstacle?
Like, you didn't even see it coming. You like, man, okay, I didn't see that coming.
Evan, do you mind if I share our story of our meeting in Austin?
No, go ahead.
All right. So
wait. So yeah, just
maybe no. Okay, I won't share that story. All right. So
like, what story
you can just be aware of time frames.
All right. Long story short, I think for me, what obstacle that I didn't anticipate was, one of them I would say is knowing a good friend of yours was going to be planning not far away. And so, and wow.
Yeah. So basically, so you and Evan are close, right? In terms of
we're not far from each other distance wise. And it was an obstacle until God shared with me that what he has for us is for us, and what God has for Evan is for Evan, and what God has for church down the street is for them. And so it was an obstacle until I changed my perspective of it. And so I'll just leave it at that. There is a fun story behind the scenes that we'll share maybe a couple of years from now.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, I think, you know, the short version of that is there was a point where we sat down and we kind of both said, hey, I feel like, you know, in the future, this is what we'll do. We'll start churches. And we
Right.
were going to be very, very close to each other.
Right.
Mhm.
And we both kind of looked at each other like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, agree. Go
Yeah.
ahead, man.
And no, it was absolutely like, well, you almost felt like, God, did I miss it? Or what is the deal with that? Like, why,
Right.
how does that even work? How does that make sense?
Mhm.
Right.
And I don't know, George, I don't know that we still have a great answer for that.
No.
Other
No.
than we just know this is what God has asked us to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. You know, it's
Agreed.
interesting because like, you know, because we're from like the Word of Faith, and in their tradition, when people launch churches, they want churches to be like 20 miles apart and stuff like that. Right. And in Atlanta, that could be major. That's multiple cities away, you know, someplace in Atlanta. So I can imagine how that can be interesting. Right. And because we all know like basically the same people too. Right. You know, so what are we doing here? Right.
Yeah.
Right. And from a point of reference, I'm sorry, from a quick point of reference, all of us are launching full Sunday services next year.
Yeah,
So,
almost at like the same time.
Right.
Like you
Right.
guys are
So
the first Sunday, and I'm like the second Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So from a point of
Yeah.
reference, I think for the listeners, none of us have been meeting every Sunday yet. So we're talking about we're giving you a behind the scenes look as we plan towards that day. And this would be so cool to watch a year from now.
I know, huh?
It would be so cool to watch from a year from now.
like, yeah, you're just concerned about what, and that never happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Evan had a point that I cut him off.
No, I was just, saying also not just that we know each other and we know so many other of the same people, but also theologically, like you guys said, we're going to be very, very close, if not,
right,
almost the exact same. And so theologically bringing two churches into a small area is it's just, it's to think about. It's something, one of the things that jumped out at me, there was a church here really where I thought we would be going.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it online while I was in Texas. So as soon as we got here, the first Sunday I went to that church and I walked out of that service and I said, God, I feel like this is exactly what you want us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a big city that I thought we were going to be in. And I walked out saying, God, we just moved all the way across the country, left everything.
Yeah.
And I thought, this was going to be this unique church in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a church that is exactly what I think we're going to be.
What?
And kind of George's point, I had to, that was an unexpected obstacle that I just had to shift my perspective and my thinking on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause like my church, we're in the Buckhead area. And you could walk from my church location to Annie Stanley's Buckhead Church. Like literally.
Wow.
I think we even share the same parking deck, right? I was like, you want to be right next to Annie Stanley? Like what?
But now to flip it a little bit, that's why I think it's so important that to control what we can control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And totally rely on God. Because to me, the further we go, the more God, for us, tailors the vision. He tailors it for the people that we're called to reach.
Yeah,
And, we've had 3 interest meetings, and I've talked about the vision 3 different times. And every time I feel like God gives me,
like more revelation,
tweaks it a little bit and gives me more insight. And I think we're not talking about this, but I think one thing as leaders of any organization, especially pastors, I think being able to hear from God and be flexible about what God is calling you to do is so important, because I think even though the word of God doesn't change, I think how we go about sharing the gospel with others can change. I view it like a Christmas present. The gift is inside the present. The wrapping paper can be different based on where we are. And I think that's the fun part of 3 different churches and Andy Stanley's, whoever's. I think it's very important that we understand the wrapping paper that God has called us to use to reach who He's called us to reach.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like everybody in Atlanta go to church, right? So it's not like we got any shortage of people that can attend church, right? So like one of my obstacles I didn't realize was that I didn't realize how hard it'd be to find a church location. Right. I've seen like our bishop and our pastors, they go out and they find locations. It's like it's magic, but man, I got so many no's. Like we don't sell it. We don't rent the churches. We don't want to do this. This might be a good space. I did not expect that at all. That was like totally unexpected. And so it's like, and then too, what I didn't expect, someplace I wanted to go, there was already churches there on certain times. I was like, man, how many Star churches are in Atlanta? You know, it's like, what? Right. So I didn't expect that. So that was a big deal. I didn't really see coming.
I had certain locations that they just stopped responding to me altogether. Like they said no, and I didn't take no for an answer, and I kind of kept, and now they're just full on avoiding me. Like they will not.
Yeah. It's like, we're gonna walk around the building 3 times, right? 7 times. Right? This is what God wants us. Yeah. And then they tell me the price tag. Oh, okay, maybe not.
Okay, God, I see why you closed that door. I see why.
Yeah. So, and it was amazing. Like, we saw this one space that, they welcome us into space, but it was so expensive, man. It was like I was teetering on maybe, we grew up in faith, right? This is a faith walk, right? And so like, I felt like God saying, this is not faith, this is foolishness. Like, it was just so expensive. I said, I was born on foolishness, not faith. Right. So there's this place for stretching, but I think with this particular location, it was just too big of a stretch. Right. It's like I was trying to reach too far into the future where I think we were going, that I need to just kind of dial it back a little bit. Let me ask you a third question here. So, we all married with kids at various ages. George's kid's a little bit older than ours. Me and Evans. But what issues did you guys have to work through with your families with launching a church? So even though Ed was a pastor for 9 years, starting your own thing in another state, George is on staff at a church, well-established, large brand. His wife is working for the church. I'm a deacon at our church for the last 20 some years. My wife has been, with the church for almost 30 years. So what things you guys had to work out with your families to actually launch your church?
Yeah, I'll start. That was definitely the most difficult thing about all of this to this point was, first of all, telling my wife, hey, I think God's asking us to move to Georgia to start a church.
Yeah.
And then telling our kids was, it was because my kids, all they know is Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been at the same school. They were at all of them went to the same preschool, they're in sports. Just really, really entrenched in home and community. And so we knew our oldest was going to take it tough. We knew our middle child was going to be devastated. And we knew our youngest wasn't, she didn't really know. So we brought them in one by one. We told our oldest, and it was tough. He was upset. He was really upset. But what we were worried about was that middle one, because he had a really good, close friend, and he doesn't do change well. We brought him into the room after we told our oldest, and as soon as we said it, he just broke down, and he was crying uncontrollably. And I wish I could tell you, I had some great faith statement or moment, and I stepped in as an amazing dad and calmed him down, but I'm sitting there in tears too, looking at my wife like, honey, you got to say something.
Yeah.
And I think, and our daughter, she cried only because she knew her brothers cried.
Crying,
So she didn't, but 2 minutes later, she was fine. I think just, the reality of, we are taking our children and moving them across the country and uprooting them from everything that they're used to and everything that they know. And they're not choosing this. They're not even really prepared to do this.
Yeah.
That by far was the most difficult thing for us.
Wow. That's tough. That's tough. Cause these kids are moving across states. My kids is moving 30 minutes away, but it's across the state. Yeah.
Yeah. My middle child, the one who took it the toughest, he asked me the other day, he said, Dad, what would have happened if we just stayed in Texas? He's looking for some reasoning, to be able to grasp it. And we've tried to be really intentional with maybe over communicating to them and helping them through it. But yeah. Now let me wrap it up, and then I know y'all. But what happened was we moved here, and as soon as we moved here, we live in a cul-de-sac, and there are literally 10 kids in this cul-de-sac around our kids' ages.
Oh wow, okay.
And they immediately hit it off, and they have so many more friends now. We were just talking about this yesterday with my oldest too. in Texas, we used to have to make them go outside. Like, you gotta go outside. Now we can't get them to come inside.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
So God's completely worked it out for sure.
That is good. That is good. Because kids are big on their friends. Cause like even now, my little kids, it's time for them to start changing schools, and like, you know, leaving their friends is a big deal. It is a big deal. So your kid's a little bit older, George. You got one that's out of college, two that's about to go to college. So what about how to go with your wife and kids? How to go with?
No, it's a great question, and like Evan said, to me the very first conversation you have is with your wife, because if you don't solidify that, there is no conversation with children yet. Because the worst thing you want to do, in my opinion, is present a divided front. And so if you don't have the conversation and make sure way ahead of time, my wife and I, we talked about it, and we have been talking about it since we went to seminary, Bible school a long time ago. And then when things start bubbling back up again, we were having really good conversations. So we were on the same page. Our background is we moved across country back in 2006 when our oldest was going to 8th grade. And so we had the experience of moving a teenager across country. And we did some things well, we did some things not so well during that move. So with that being the background, we knew kind of some things to avoid when we told our children. And so as Evan said, we have, or as you all have said, our middle child is about to graduate from high school this May. So for her, it's not much of a change. And because they're both in sports, really their family is their sports team. They play year-round soccer, so they're around their club team quite a bit. So for them, their friend group is predominantly their club soccer team, not so much their high school teams. But for us, the girls' first question was, do we have to change churches?
That's interesting.
And so one thing I've learned is, well, we're not going to move them physically, because I would not recommend moving teenagers, changing houses if you don't have to. Changing schools in high school is really difficult for teenagers, no matter how friendly they are, no matter, this is my opinion, of course, no matter how unplugged or plugged in, no matter what they say, I think moving teenagers is very tough. My wife teaches high school math, and so she's seen that. She's worked with new students moving into her school. It's really tough. So for us, we talked with our girls about it, and then we answered their questions. And but it was difficult still, but now they're settled in what we're doing. And we're pulling them along with us as they are ready. Definitely don't want to make them do anything because we want them to have their own personal relationship with God. But what we do want to do is model that your entire life you should be following what God is asking you to do. So that's what we're wanting to model. With teenagers, it's more about what you do than what you say anyway. So I can say it's going to be really great, and then if I'm home complaining every night, they're going to follow my actions, follow suit, my words any day. So far, so good.
So with your teenager, you're saying you didn't want them to have to move around, so you're going to let them stay at the old church until they're ready to come over to the new church.
The beauty of a child having a car is that she gets to drive, and so really we're gonna walk them through that process slowly. And so it's at this point they can stay, but we're gonna walk them through that process slowly once we have the right leader for the youth ministry. I think trying to get them to connect with someone when there's no leader for the youth ministry is tough right now until we have the right leader, and we're not going to rush that decision.
Yeah. I mean, and that's cool that you're able to do something like this very non-traditionally, right? Because like, this was like 30 years ago, the kids got to go somewhere, but just having that freedom to say, hey, mom and dad, we're starting this thing. But if you're a little bit older, we're perfectly fine that we don't see this as disloyal or anything like that, that you can, make your choices about this. And it'll give them a better taste of Christianity as they get older, right? It's not like mom and dad made me do this, right? So I know for me, my wife was the biggest, not obstacle per se, but she had to feel comfortable with it, because like she's been going to Word of Faith longer than me, and she's from Detroit and she got moved to Atlanta. And so for her, the big thing was she wanted to feel that we were sent out and not that we just went out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that was a big deal because, we've seen, it's just like, that was just really a big deal for her. It wasn't as much for me, but it was a big deal for her. So like, I remember when Pastor Carrot, brought us on stage and he laid hands on us and announced the congregation we was leaving, like she cried. I thought she was crying for excitement, but she was crying because it was acknowledged the right way. You know what I'm saying? So like, so that was one of the things for her. I think with COVID, my kids got disconnected anyway from the physical church. So they don't really know what they're quote unquote missing per se. Right. So I think for COVID, it kind of broke some connections they was having. My 12-year-old was transitioned from children's church to youth ministry, and the youth ministry hasn't really started up anyway at our old church. So like for her, it's like, she's like, okay, let's go. Right.
It's very unique.
So we're in a space where because of the, because of the pandemic, there was some, unfortunately there was some ties broken, so it allowed the transition also be so.
Well, let me say this. I love your wife. Your wife is awesome. She doesn't. Matter of fact, she trained my wife in a lot of the youth ministry and children's ministry that she's done. So yeah, love her.
Yeah, lot of connections. Yeah. So let's talk about, we're talking about the just leading the right way. So for Evan, he was at a church for like 9 years, right? Head pastor, sent by a bishop to be over that particular thing. George was an assistant pastor or ish, I think assistant pastor might be the right term for it. And I've been, in my church for 20 years. I never forget when I was telling my pastor that I'm thinking about this. That was the first time in a long time I had a conversation I was nervous about having.
Okay.
Right. In a long time. Right. I haven't been nervous about conversation in a long time, but I was really nervous about just having that conversation because I didn't know how it was going to go. Right. And so when you guys were thinking about this, were there any concerns you were having about what your pastor or bishop would say that you guys were starting a church? Do you feel like it may take it the wrong way? Any thoughts on that?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah. So for those who may not be familiar, I was pastoring a church under Word of Faith International Christian Center under Keith Butler, and Bishop Butler, he sends people out to start churches. So obviously the church that we all used to go to was in Smyrna. Now I'm not sure.
It's Austell now.
Yeah. Austell.
It's close. Same.
Yeah. So part of my process was making sure I heard from God that this is what he was asking us to do. Then going to my wife and, kind of in the back of my mind, almost hoping like she says no. And I can say, God, this woman you gave me. right. Like, cause I didn't want to leave. And then once she was on board, now the next step for us is to tell him. And I'm with you, Amos. I don't know that I've been nervous to have a conversation before that. I can't remember the last time before that. And for us, it was for this reason, because I have no idea how this is going to go. I have to be prepared that as soon as I tell him that, God's leading us to start a church in Georgia, that I got to turn in my keys. I get no more paycheck. I don't get to say goodbye. Like, I'm not saying that would happen, but you just got to be prepared.
Yeah, you don't know. You know how it's going to go, right?
You have no idea. So I went in. I was super nervous. He's sitting there after a ministers conference, and I went in and just sat down and said, "Sir, I believe God's asking us to move to Georgia to start a church." And he kind of sits back in his chair. And if you don't know Bishop Butler, he's a very intimidating figure. He has a very strong presence. He kind of sits back in his chair, folds his arms, and says, "Okay, well, give me some time to transition the church in Texas." Which to me says, okay, you get to go back this Sunday and preach, and you get another paycheck, and you get to say goodbye and all that. And we worked out a transition plan and was able to do it well, I think.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So when you approach, how about you, George? When you approach your pastor about it, did he approach you or you approach him? I don't remember. How did this?
And it's great to hear. I never heard that part from Evan's story, so it's great to hear, man. And I think for us, this is such a new time for the circles where we come from. I think it's not. I think everyone recognizes that it's not the same environment for churches like it was 20, 20, 30
Yeah.
years ago. I think it's a different time. And so mine was more mutual. Linked Up Church is an awesome church that we've been a part of the last 7, 8 years. And really, it was a conversation that we've been having, I've been having with Pastor Gregory for several years. He's always asked me, what do you believe God has called you to do? And I'm not going to be preachy, but I think until you can verbalize what you believe God is telling you, I think even you don't really believe it until you can verbalize it. And so I think taking those steps to say, I believe God is calling you to pastor a church, over the years, really helped us as we moved forward with those conversations. So for me, there wasn't really a nervous conversation. It was more of, I think the time is now.
Okay.
And that was mutual. And once we both agreed on the time frame, it's been so refreshing, honestly, to be able to have those conversations, because the conversations go from employer to, hey, peer wise, how did you approach this? How should we approach this? What kind of things to look out for? And as I said earlier, but even that comes with its own set of fears. And so for me, I do remember God asking me, will you go even if there's 4? The 4 being me, my wife, and my 2 daughters who live with us. And I think once I said yes to that question, I think it really helped to simmer down any fears I had, because as kind of what Evan alluded to, even when things are going well, the enemy tries to tell you that you're one bad mistake away from severing a relationship. And so I had to really put those fears aside. I didn't think about that earlier, to have those good conversations, and it's going very well. But I also had to decide, in my mind, even if we start with 4, we are still going to do what God has called us to do. Now, we have not started with 4; we're doing well. But I think I had to settle that in my heart. And let God be God in our lives. If that makes sense.
I was going to say, he should ask you, would you go with 2? Because apparently, if you're not making the other 2 go,
well, that's a very valid point, because it could have been 2.
It could have been a family split, right?
yeah. No, it's a great question.
What's interesting about us talking about this is that for guys who may be thinking why we're because like some church, they may not have these issues, but in our system, it literally was the only way you start a church if God spoke to the head person, he spoke to you. It was none of this. The people below them sensing something and telling the leadership up what they believe God said. So it definitely represents a new change in philosophy in some ways, right? So that's why you kind of hear our kind of nervousness by having these conversations, because like this is like, hey, we're saying we're breaking the mold in some sense. Like we're telling them what we believe God is saying, and that's why the nervousness come in. Because like even though Evan was telling Bishop, and I was telling my pastor, we knew that we were supposed to do this.
Right.
Yeah,
I wasn't asking.
Yeah.
I was saying this is what God's asked us to do. I wasn't saying, what do you think about this? And that, I think that's different. And for me, for sure, I just did not know of anybody that had ever went to Bishop Butler and said, here is what God's told me to do, and I'm going to step away to do it. So you just don't know how that's going to go. Yeah.
But our hearts, we always want to do things in the right way. So that's why that's why people are like, why you tell them? Like, well, this is how you do things decent in order, right?
Yeah.
So let's move on here a little bit. Let's ask a couple more questions. So this is gonna be a weird question. So we're launching 3 churches in January, and we talked about this a little bit. Why does Atlanta need 3 more churches? Because other church plans are trying to think about this. Like you literally are launching, like you and Evan are launching close to each other. I'm launching in the Buckhead area. So why does Atlanta need 3 more? And so how did you guys rationalize that in your mind with planning your guys' churches with the need for 1 more?
Wow. You want the spiritual answer? Or you want the natural answer?
Natural answer, spiritual. Probably natural first. Could that be?
And I think this is such an individual question. As I mentioned earlier, I believe following God's plan for your life is is such a personal thing. And I think a lot of times ministers will preach about it from their personal experience with leading. I would say, first of all, why? Because of the Great Commission. When I think about I'm a problem solver naturally, and I think about why would God plant a new church? I think ultimately it helps to fulfill the Great Commission. That's first of all.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus commanded us to do. And of course, Jesus didn't know that there would be urban sprawl, and he didn't know that there. Well, wow, maybe he did, but let me just put it that way. But so how we interpret that today is, I think there are so many people who don't know who Christ is, and COVID really, I think, really expedited people wanting to be local more than anything else. I think people want to be close to home. I think people want to feel like they're a part of a church that cares about the local community. And not saying that Woodstock doesn't already have that. Woodstock has that, but I still think there's still a place for the gospel to be preached and for people to. I won't go into a whole vision because I can quickly go into that mode there. But I think the short answer biblically is because of the Great Commission, and because there are still people who are moving into these cities, who live in these cities, who may feel I don't want to say disenfranchised, but I think that fits. I think there's a place for the gospel to be preached there.
Yeah. So it's almost like we can plant a church and not disparages the church that's still there. Right.
You shouldn't.
Yeah.
Should, right.
Not only could we should,
Right.
Absolutely. One of the things we did in Round Rock, where I pastored just outside of Austin, this was phenomenal. Every 5 years, we would take the population of Round Rock, and then we would survey every Christian church in the city, and we'd ask them, and I say there's a group of pastors that got together, and so we would ask, all right, how many services do you have? How many people can fit in each service? And then what's your capacity right now? And what we found was, if every non-Christian, or not even non-Christian, if every Christian in the city of Round Rock decided to go to church on the same Sunday, the current churches would not be able to hold that level of attendance. Yeah. Now, obviously, you might go to the neighboring city or whatever. But the point was, we don't have enough churches. Now, I don't know, those numbers in Acworth or Woodstock or Buckhead, but I would feel very confident in saying it is the exact same. Yeah. That if every church in Woodstock was filled to capacity in all their services, every church in Buckhead, every church in Acworth, there's still not enough room for all the Christians, much less the unbelievers.
All right, good stuff.
So to take the Great Commission, to take, what we're supposed to be doing, and you add to it, God clearly loves and cares about family. He's all about family. I mean, that's a big reason why us human beings are here. And what we're doing in starting another expression of that family is adding to the kingdom family. And God's not going to be opposed to that. Now, obviously, if God didn't call you to do it, you'll find out real quick.
Real quick, yeah.
But I would say we don't just need 3 more churches. We probably need 3,000 more churches or 30,000 more churches. Because Amos is going to reach somebody that I can't reach, and George is going to reach somebody that I can't reach.
Absolutely.
What I would give to have a loved one, a family member, a friend be able to be reached by George or Amos because they won't listen to me is priceless. I mean, there's no value we can put on that. And so, I would say we need 3, 10, 100, 3,000 more guys on this call.
Yeah. And that's a good perspective, right? It's like, it's almost like, Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, the works are few, right? And so if you're looking at, I tell people entrepreneurship all the time, they say, well, I don't want to start a business because other people doing stuff like this, but that doesn't really matter, right? When God speaks to us to do these things, there's people we're called to reach, and I remember Jesus says, like he said, my sheep will know my voice. And I believe that's true for almost every pastor, right? You have a certain sheepfold that when Evan preaches, they hear Evan. They don't hear me. they hear Evan or they hear George, right? And so I think for me, being okay to being next to one of the biggest churches in Buckhead was like, there's people I'm called to serve that they can't serve, right? And as George said, there's a desire for connections too, right? And at some point, it's almost like, you could go to Walmart to buy baseball equipment, but you may want to go see the specialty shop to buy it too, right? So everybody has their people to serve. So with that in mind,
can I add one thing to that? Because this, I'm not even sure where I heard this, but it's stuck with me since I heard it. Mm-hmm. That whole idea of, the sheep hear the shepherd's voice, and the rest of that is, in a stranger's voice they won't follow. Mm-hmm. So obviously talking about Jesus, but pastors being the under shepherd. And what's so powerful about that is, Amos has to find his voice as a shepherd. George has to find his voice as a shepherd. I have to find my voice, because there are people that will follow that as we follow Christ, and a stranger's voice they will not follow. Mm-hmm. So if Amos is their shepherd, they can't follow Andy Stanley, even though he's right next door, because that's a stranger's voice. Mm-hmm. They can't follow, First Baptist Woodstock or Woodstock City, because that's a stranger's voice. Yeah. And God putting shepherds, under shepherds in the body of Christ, us to find our voice, because there are people that God will use us to reach.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about it, that's kind of how it was with us back in the 90s when we came to Faith Christian Center. It's like they had a certain voice through like Pastor Butler. And like this, like I used to tell my wife, I said, the guys that are on staff, you guys might as well have been like the super friends. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, whatever y'all said was the word, we're going to do it. Right. Because like whatever you guys were speaking then, I heard it and I needed it. Right?
Yeah. No, good stuff. Yeah. No, but to that point though, I this past Wednesday, we have midweek meetups, and God just impressed upon me just to ask those who attended, what drew you to certain ministries? And I asked that question because I wanted to hear from them what drew them. And to what Evan said and what you're saying, Amos, we all latch on to different things. We all, for me, walking into Faith Christian Center the first time, I remember saying, this is cool. Now, I didn't want to be saved yet. I wanted to sing some more. But I said, this is cool because I saw people who was around my age, who looked like me, and they were on fire for God. And I hadn't seen that. I had not seen that. Now, as I said, I wasn't ready to make that decision yet to get involved, but that was definitely one thing that really drew me. And that was what I needed. I think that's the fun part of the local church, working to meet the needs of the local community. I think that's so important for us to be connected to community, to understand what does the community need, so that we can. That's why we're there. We're not there to be in the community and say, okay, all y'all come to me. No, we're there to be involved in the local community, and I know that's on all of our hearts. I'm not saying that some other churches aren't. I'm just saying, to me, that's even more real than it's ever been in my life. The importance of being connected to the community and getting the pulse and knowing how we can join the community and meet the needs in that community with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Fun story about George. I remember I was at a singles event, and George said something about he's about to get married. I was like, what? That was like, he might have been cursing, just said a curse word or something. You about to do what? I was like, how is that even possible? Right? So that's good stuff. So we got like about another 10 minutes.
Hey man, you just left that story out there,
but you got married and it's worked out. You started a church. You got 3 kids. So like, but
it'll be 21 years in December.
Yes,
it'll be 21.
Yes. Yeah. But it just so like me being in that singles ministry, hearing George tell me he's getting married, like I needed to hear that at that moment, right? Because that was so far off my radar. Like people just like what.
So. I remember that conversation very well, actually.
Yeah. So yeah. All right, let's ask. I'm gonna switch up some more practical questions. And I don't want you guys to give me specific numbers in here, but how for your launches, how are you guys? What's the mechanisms about how you guys are financing your launches? So I know for the Church for Entrepreneurs, our mechanism is that we have online partners that's been partnering with us, since, for a few years now. And we're basically using that mechanism to kind of plant our local congregation. So we don't have, so I told the partners, it's kind of like the partners are actually our sending ministry now.
Wow, that's great.
You know, so I didn't have to do any special fundraising per se. I just kind of just told the partners, hey, you know, I believe God's called us to launch a church, and we're just shifting finances to really I'm shifting finance from the family to the launch of the church, because an online ministry is very inexpensive. Right. Our expenses went from like 100 times just the moment I said we launched a church. You know, so that's kind of how we're doing it. So anyway, you guys want to share this, like, you know, just what's the mechanism of how you guys actually funding your ministries?
Yeah.
You want to go ahead?
Go ahead. No, go ahead, George.
No. And first of all, I'd say, from my perspective, this has never been a better time to plant a church in America than it is right now. From a perspective of all the tools that are available, all of the groups that are available to give you wisdom and insight. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, if you're watching this call and you believe God has called you to plant a church, I'd say there is never not a better time than right now. Make sure you hear from God. And so for me, having a sending church has been a huge blessing. This past weekend, we had our last interest meeting, and it was one of our goals to open up children's ministry. And so Linked Up Church is gifting us their truck and trailer.
Oh, wow.
And so we were able to use the truck and trailer. Of course, we went and cleaned it out, and some things that Linked Up Church was not using, we were able to have. And so that's a huge burden lifted from certain things to acquire to do that. Because we talk about, but even that's a starting point, and we have a vision even further than that. Mm-hmm. But the starting point, being able to have a sending church is a huge blessing. So from a financial perspective, you know, having Linked Up Church as a sending church has been a great blessing, and so that's a burden lifted. And then having interest meetings where we're doing what God has told us to do, which is, you know, set the vision and make it plain. Mm-hmm. And people are connecting with that already, and not just connecting with their attendance, but connecting with their resources. And so being able to use the resources from those interest meetings to continue to build on top of what's been given to us. If I'm understanding your question correctly, that is our mechanism. And and you know, and there are people in all of our lives that have known us our entire lives, who know us personally, who are connecting with us personally. And so they're sowing into, I don't know that firmly, but I can tell by our conversations. We have family members in Texas who have known us, my wife and I, our entire lives, and they're going, yeah, I know the character of God, and I've seen God grow you up, and here, we'll bless you. And so that's what we're doing, and it's resonating with our family members, but also with the local community. And that's so humbling to me to see that, and to see people connect with that. I'm in awe of what God is doing, and I just can't wait to celebrate with everybody, with Evan and with Amos when those launch days happen, and to continue to see what God does in y'all's lives and in the lives of the two churches.
Yeah.
That's you know, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you guys, and I'm thinking, man, that'd been nice to have some online partners. That'd be nice to have, you know, a church, you know, gifting and helping with all that. But at the same time, you know, basically 10 years ago now, essentially a church was handed over to me, and I appreciate that support. I understand, not exactly what you guys are going through, but I understand that level of comfort and the ability to be able to then focus on things such as ministry and vision and all that stuff. Part of what I've been most excited about is coming here and basically having nothing. And when I say basically, I mean nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, our church didn't write us a check. Nobody's given us a trailer yet. And so as you ask that, I'm thinking, you know, what is our mechanism? And here's our mechanism. Our mechanism so far has just been relationship. we said, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what we believe God's asked us to do. And we have been blown away by people giving. I mean, I had pastor friends in Round Rock, saying like, hey, who do I make this check out to?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm saying, we don't even have a name, much less a bank account. I don't know, like, hold it. Or, I mean, I guess you could write it to me, but I don't know what to tell you.
That's good.
And so we've gotten to a point where right now we're at about 50% of what we believe our launch budget needs to be.
Praise God. Praise God.
And we haven't really done any like fundraising. We've told people what we're doing, and we've had people ask, and we've given them ways that they can give. And now this next 50% it's going to sound really strange, but it's the part I'm excited about, of like, let me sit down with you. Let me tell you about Propel Church. And I'm going to ask you, can you give? And this is, I could talk about this all day too, but there's an organization that will match funds, and you can go through their training, and it's a great deal. And so we're in the process of that. And my wife's, me and my wife were talking, we said, all right, if we get through that process and they offer us these funds, what are you thinking? And we both kind of said, and this needs to be spirit led, by the way, don't be ridiculous. If somebody's giving you money, take the money. But we kind of said, we've just seen God provide in such a way up until this point. We want to make sure we don't do anything to give anybody else or any other organization the credit. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying we won't take. I mean, we'll see, but we're not like, oh, we need this. We're counting on God and this organization, or God and this sending church, or God and these partners. Like, no, God, you're our provider. We've been preaching that forever, and now we got to live it. Yeah, I got to live it. Remember that first question about fears? I got to live
it. And hopefully what people are hearing is, and I love what Evan said, and that's why I think it's so important. I'm trying not to make this spiritual, but I think planting a church is very spiritual, because at every step, you have to trust God in every step. And what I mentioned before, I know that organization well, that he's talking about, and they are an awesome organization. And so we could talk about that later, but being able to trust God to even have those conversations with people, to the wisdom to sit down and articulate the vision that God has given you in such a way that someone wants to connect to it, is that in and of itself is a blessing. And so, as Evan said, we're in awe of what God is doing, and which is why it's so important. And for me, that the in awe part is to know that you pray, we are praying it out, and then we're seeing, like Pastor Gregory calls them, signposts. Like you're driving to, Houston on I-20 or I-10, you see a signpost of where you're headed. Well, you're not there yet, but you see this indication that you're headed in the right direction. And so you see those indications and you go, wow, we just hit, I'll use Evan's example, 35% of what our pre-launch budget. Now we're at 50%. Oh my, babe, this is, and you're excited because not that you weren't in faith about it, but you're excited about, wow, it's really happening even better than what we believed for. And I'm not trying to speak for him, but that's been our experience thus far. But to me, it still goes back to that question: will you go even if there's 4 or 2? Since Evan cut my 4 to 2 earlier, because I think in my opinion, if you settle that, then you're not moved by the giving or lack thereof. You're not moved by someone showing up or the lack thereof, because you're on the path that you believe God has led you to be on. I think that's still the most important thing. Yeah.
And once you settle that, you have to settle it more than once. Because what I've found is I settled that, man, whoever comes. And then you start getting into it and you start hearing about George's interest parties, and you hear Amos is starting a church in Buckhead. And you're like, no, we need this many people. And we gotta, and I'm like, no, I gotta settle this again. Whoever comes. And then you have an interest party and you have no idea if anybody's gonna be there. And then nope. If it's just us, We're still saying yes.
Still doing it right.
I don't know about y'all, but I've had to settle that time and time again.
Yeah. You know what's funny though, is like, I think we all see other people being more successful than us. Right. Cause like when Evan said he's launching church, I mean, Evan had like 1,000-person church. Like it never crossed my mind that nobody would show up at Evan's church. You know what I'm saying? Because like, I just know Evan, he's got a way of attracting people, and he say he's doing something, people's going to be there. Right. But you never see that for yourself. Right. You always say, okay, man, George, of course, George's gonna have a good church. You know what I'm saying? Like, George is very organized. He's very practical. Every time I've known George, he's been like just meticulous. Okay, we're doing it this way. I'm doing this way. He's got a plan. Plans on top of plans. And that's like, what am I doing, guys?
Yeah, but I think we see you that way, right? Like Absolutely. We see you with your online ministry and how how well you reach the group that you reach, and how excellent you do it. And we're
2 million downloads. I mean, come on.
Yeah. And I mean that, like, the combination, and I think this is probably true for all of us too, but like the combination of you and your wife, we're like, man, the first Sunday I got off, I got to decide, am I going to Linked Up North or am I going to Buckhead? Like, the second Sunday I'm going to the other one,
Yeah. That's good stuff, guys. Go ahead, George.
And Amos, I want to turn it to those who might be starting a business. It's the same thing. Like, even if you're starting a business, the first 2 or 3 times you have these sales that go really well, you're believing God that, hey, God, this is the business you called me to start. And then someone buys your product, and then you go, wow, man, I just someone just bought this product for the very first time. It's that same kind of awe. This past Sunday we had our last interest meeting, and I on purpose don't try to put goals on God. And at some point I was preparing the sermon, and I reminded myself that I told God I would go for the 4. So if there was 4 or 2, and so as I was about to deliver it, I just put my notes down. I just shared the vision from my heart, and just to feel so comfortable knowing, wow, the best. We've heard other preachers say this, and I'll echo it. The best place to be is right in the center of God's will.
Yeah,
that's just the best place to be.
Yeah.
And to Evan's point, I think we can be in the center, and then some external influence can try to move us out, and then we have to resettle and move ourselves right back into the center.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'll have to do that again. And I think that's where social media can be bad. I think it's good in a lot of ways, but I think that's where it can be bad if you're not limiting how you let that information
come in,
get into your heart. Yeah.
And can I say this too, for all of us that are doing ministry or starting churches or pastoring churches that may listen to this, please ask yourself why the need to actually post about the numbers. I get it. Every number is a person. I get that. I wholeheartedly get that. Count that, celebrate that. But I'll never forget, this was 5 or 6 years ago. I was pastoring. We had a great, Easter Resurrection Sunday, and we posted how many people came, how many people gave their life to Jesus. We posted all this stuff, right? And a buddy of mine, I was talking to him, and he was like, man, we had a great Easter. It was phenomenal. God moved. He was so excited. He goes, and then I saw your church's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, I don't know what. And he said, I got so discouraged because what I thought was great with us, you guys blew out of the water. And I thought, why can we not just say, God, a lot of people got saved. A lot of people showed up. Like, why can we not say it in a way to downgrade or degrade what somebody else is feeling? Yeah. Because I think what we all know is we can say there's no competition, and we're truly rooting for each other. Right. But there's something in us that when I see, 1,000 people at Amos's church, I'm like, why don't we have 1,000? And you quit yourself and you get out of it quickly. But just what's the motivation?
What's the motivation? Yeah.
That's
good, Evan. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. We've been at this about an hour. So last question.
I thought we just started.
Right?
Maybe we need to have a part 2. I don't know.
Yeah. We'll definitely have plenty of opportunity for part 2.
Let us know in the comments if you want a part 2. Let us know in the comments.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So let's turn to some advice mode here. So obviously we haven't launched yet. We're all in January, but if you were to give advice either to your younger self or somebody who's thinking about planning a church, what advice, based on your current understanding you're seeing right now, what would you go back and say to yourself or to somebody who's thinking about planting a church?
Wow, that's a good question.
Yeah. I like I'm not sure if he came up with it, but I heard Craig Rochelle say this, and it may not be exact, but he basically says, we overestimate what God can do in a year, and we underestimate what God will do in 10 years.
Mm.
And, just from pastoring for 9 years, I learned that, what's urgent isn't always what's important. What feels like has to be done right now, and has to be great right now, and has to be perfect right now, and has to be tried right now. And, it's much more likely that you're playing a long game, not the short game.
Yeah, that's good.
And especially in starting a church, there's so much emphasis and pressure on launching big and starting well. And I get that, and I understand that. And we're trying to do that as well. But what's week 10? What's week 25? What's week 75 going to look like? And if we can keep our focus on what God's called us to do and the kingdom, then I think we'll be much less hurried, and we'll be much less hurt. Because the people that start with you are not going to be the people that finish with you. And I mean, that's just proven statistics in church planting. So we get hurt whenever we take it personal, and it's about us, it's about our church, and it's not about the kingdom.
Yeah.
I learned very early on, like, if you leave our church and you're going to another church that teaches the Bible, I have a responsibility to make sure this is not a sheep gone astray. But from church to church, you're still in the same kingdom. You're still in the same team.
Yeah.
And if somebody leaves Propel Church to go to Linked Up North, or go to Amos, your church in Buckhead, like, I'm going to celebrate that, because I'm trusting that I taught them to hear, or somebody taught them to hear God's voice. And if they're telling me this is what God's saying, like, I'm going to trust that. So I say all that to say, my advice would be, play the long game. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep the kingdom in mind, and that'll help you from, it's going to hurt when people leave. It is, but it'll hurt much less if this isn't about you, and it's not about your church, but it's about God and his kingdom.
That's good. That's good. Because it was about us. We're thinking about the numbers, the stats.
How could you leave me?
Yeah.
George isn't better than me. Amos isn't better than me. It's all that foolishness, and it's no longer about God and the kingdom.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, could you imagine Paul, like, wait, you're mad because they went from one Christian church to another Christian church? Like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Could you imagine some of the disciples trying to figure out our pettiness at times?
Yeah.
Wait, you mean Paul actually talked about that? That was an issue in the New Testament? I never knew that.
I'm on Paul. I'm on Apollos. I'm on Jesus Christ alone.
Yeah. Like, come on.
No, that's good stuff, man. I don't know if I can answer that question yet.
Okay.
Honestly, we're not taking it day by day per se. The only thing I would say is, the earlier you hear from God and then you follow God's voice, the better.
Yeah.
That's my only advice right now is the earlier you hear God's voice and then you decide to follow it. I like to say it this way. Hearing God's voice is one thing. Obeying God's voice is actually a totally separate thing altogether.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I think if you're listening to this and you believe God is leading you in a certain direction, of course you want to make sure you're clear on that, but do it. Begin to put steps to your faith, begin to walk it out. That's my only advice at this point.
Man, I'm getting fired up. George, can I add one little thing to that? Because I think that's so good. And what I've found is a lot of Christians, let's just say Christians that maybe have a similar theological background as us, they will hear God's voice, but they don't trust their own ability to hear God's voice. It's not that they don't trust God. They're like, God, if you tell me to do it, I'll do it. I will obey. But they don't trust their own ability. They're like, is that God? I'm not really sure. You know, Pastor Gregory, Pastor Carrick, Bishop Butler, they're not the ones who said it. I'm not really sure. And then it paralyzes them and they don't get to your point, which is so true. To hear God's voice is one thing. To obey God's voice is a whole nother thing. So I would add to that, learn to trust yourself to hear God's voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
The same way God has led you to take that different way to work, or led you to a church, or led you to whatever, it's the same voice. Trust what God is saying and act on it.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, praise God. That's good stuff, guys. I guess the only thing I would add to this is that if I was to go back and tell myself something or tell someone else something, is just that, just relax.
Yes.
It's just relax. If God's called you to do this, because I remember I literally was trying to fight to relax and I didn't have the church location. Right. Because everybody's asking me, where's the church, Amos? Where's the church, Amos? Where's it going to be at, Amos? I don't know. So that was, I could just relax on that. And also, I think if I could relax on, I had our first volunteers meeting last Wednesday. And I think, honestly, I should have did it earlier. But the moment I started getting people together, it started telling me who's actually coming. Right. So I think I was postponing some of that because I didn't want to know, like, hey, if I call these meetings, who's going to show up? And so I kept pushing it off. And I think I would tell myself, hey, just don't fear those types of things. That's just the enemy trying to get you off track. So
that's good. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Like you say, we may have a part 2 or 3 of this as the year goes on. So it's a very unique experience. We got 3 people from the same ministry launching in the same month, 2 people on the same day in the same area, which violating this 20-mile rule that we used to have.
I couldn't believe you brought that up, man. I totally forgotten about that.
You forgot a 20-mile rule. Yeah. So it was funny with my 20-mile rule. It's like, I wasn't really going to do it 20 miles away. And I was looking for locations. I tell my wife, it's like, when I was looking for location, it was within a 10-mile radius of my house. I wasn't, it's like God had to send me within 10 miles of the house. Right. But really, when he opened up the bucket location, I was like, do I really want to go that far? And then in a funny joke, I mapped Quest how far away it was. It was over 20 miles. And I just had an internal chuckle. I was like, one of the guys this is a way of nodding at FCC, make it over 20 miles away.
Wow.
So yeah. All right, guys. So thank you for joining us today. And if you got any question for me or Evan or George, give them your website, and Evan, give them your website so they can check you guys out.
Sure. Our website is linkedupnorth.com, linkedupnorth.com. You can reach us by emailing us at connect@linkedupchurchnorth.com.
All right. And they're launching January 2nd at 10 or 11?
10 a.m. January 2nd at 10 a.m. It's going to be a blessing.
All right.
For sure. Super excited about it.
All right. Go ahead, Evan. Let everybody know where they can connect with you at.
Yeah. Ours is wearepropelchurch.com. So kind of a long one. wearepropelchurch.com. We're on all the social media stuff at either we're on all the stuff at We Are Propel Church. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Yeah. And January 2nd, 10 o'clock, same time. We're going to be meeting at NCG Cinema, which is in Acworth off Cobb Parkway. Yeah. So we're super excited about that. Can't wait. January 2nd.
Great location, man.
10 o'clock. Yep. So, it is cool about the conversation, guys, is that we're all doing it in 3 different types of locations. So George is doing it at a school, Evan is doing a movie theater, and I'm doing it in a co-working space. So that just shows you that God has diversity in mind when he's calling people out to do these things. So it doesn't have to be a cookie cutter. You can just follow what God has in your heart. All right, guys, you be blessed.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, Amos.
Yep.
All right.